Ja, meine Damen und Herren, meine erste Frage geht heute an Jeremy Rifkin, der es ein bisschen weiter hatte. Sie haben die These, dass wir heute in einer Situation in den Industrieländern sind, dass uns wirklich die industrielle Arbeit ausgeht, dass wir Wachstum ohne neue Jobs haben, sehr stark begründet in Ihrem Buch mit dem Verweis auf die Vereinigten Staaten. Sie haben darüber geschrieben, dass in den letzten Jahren auch in den Vereinigten Staaten, was bei uns in Deutschland oft verloren geht, sehr viele industrielle Arbeitsplätze verschwunden sind. Trotzdem frage ich mich, Sie begründen eigentlich diese These, dass uns insgesamt die industrielle Arbeit am Beispiel der USA ausgeht, eigentlich mit den letzten Jahren. Aber wenn man sich den langfristigen Trend in den USA anschaut, dann stellt man fest, dass dort zwischen 1978, wo es 22 Millionen Erwerbstätige gab, und im Jahr 2000 ein gewaltiger Beschäftigungsaufbau stattgefunden haben. Und deshalb frage ich mich, kann man wirklich aus der Entwicklung der letzten Jahre, wo wir tatsächlich in den USA einen Einbruch gehabt haben, ableiten, dass die industrielle Arbeit ausgeht?
Well, let me say first, good evening, everybody. Nice to be here. Let me deal with the U.S. first and then talk about the broader question. Every country fudges their employment data. It's a national pastime in every country in the world. But we have to understand that when we say we have a 5% unemployment rate in the United States, we have to consider other categories that are not figured into that unemployment rate. For example, the Labor Department in my country has a new term called marginally attached workers. Those are workers who are considered fully employed, even though they're underemployed, partially employed, and would like to be fully employed. But for the purposes of statistics, we count them as fully employed. Secondly, we put 2% of the adult male workforce in prison in the last 15 years. They're not counted in the unemployment statistics. I know some think that's amusing, but it's really disgraceful. But 2% of the male workforce is now in prison. So then we have, of course, the discouraged category, which you have here. But we have a very large discouraged category that's considered not on the statistics because our unemployment benefits run out much quicker than they do here in continental Europe. So you have a longer unemployment benefit period, which allows you to keep your people in the unemployed category. As soon as our benefits run out, we can put you in the discouraged category. University of Chicago did a good study, you may have seen it, Professor Sinn, about 3 years ago, saying if you look at the real unemployment figures during even the Clinton years, when we said 4%, it was closer to about 8.9%. Better than some EU countries, not as good as others. Let me say, I think there's a broader issue here. The unemployment question is not just an issue for Germany or for Europe, it's an issue for the world. My belief is that we're seeing a structural change in the nature of work that is truly historic. By analogy, the last great structural change occurred at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We ended slave labor. The bottom line was it was cheaper to feed coal to the steam engine than to feed the mouth of a slave. And after 10,000 years of slavery, we began to phase out slavery. What I'm suggesting is that there were early stages now of another great shift in work. We're ending mass wage labor in the 21st century. And that is the cheapest worker in the world, and there's some pretty cheap labor in the world, will not be as cheap as the intelligent technology that can substitute for them on the line. Not only in manufacturing, but in white-collar, services, and conceptual categories. Last thought on this. We aren't producing new jobs in the world. We're producing new skill sets. We're creating new industries because of the new high-technology revolution. That's all granted. And there will be many new job categories we can't even imagine that will be on the horizon in order to develop what we call a high-tech global economy. The difference between these jobs and jobs in the 19th and 20th century is simply this. These jobs are not mass wage labor. That was the signature of the first and second industrial revolution. These new jobs, whether they be engineers, technicians, consultants, educators, scientists, programmers, they're elite. They are boutique. They're specialized and require a lot of knowledge. But even though we will create lots of new jobs, we're not going to see tens of thousands of men and women coming out of the factory gates at software companies, telecom companies, biotech companies, and nanotech companies. And every business I work with, I teach at the advanced management program at Wharton, every company I work with around the world knows that they're moving to smaller workforces and more technology substitution. There are a few industries left with mass labor. Absolutely, in the textile industry still, yes. Healthcare, we're going to need a lot of labor-intensive jobs to take care of an aging baby boom population. Cultural industries, there's employment opportunity still there. But overall, my thesis is the cheapest worker in the world in the 21st century will not be as cheap as the intelligent technology replacing across the board, and this is a great renaissance, an opportunity. We can finally get rid of toil in the marketplace. The reason we're so scared of this, we can't imagine what a human being would do if they weren't making goods and services and being paid to do that in a market setting. So I believe that this is a great historic opportunity and probably the greatest triumph of capitalism, that we can end mass wage labor and begin to rethink what human beings do to judge their time and their worth and their value on this planet. And we need to begin the discussion sooner rather than later. Well, as I said, I think if you look at real unemployment in the United States, it's about 8.8 to 8.9%. That is, if you count the people that are in prison, 2%. Right there, that comes up to 7. There's no other country in the world that has anywhere near 2% of their adult male population out of the workforce because of incarceration. Nowhere. Secondly, this marginally attached worker is a very convenient way of taking people who have been moved into flex jobs that are temporary, underemployed, and still counting them as fully employed. And third, I think the unemployment benefit is a big issue. We simply take our people off unemployment benefits quicker than you and can put them in the discouraged category. So if you're suggesting to me, are there new jobs being created in the U.S.? Of course. There's new jobs being created in Germany. There's new jobs created all over the world. But I believe that the bottom line is we have an increasing population in the world against the diminishing opportunities for employment because we're moving out of mass wage labor in the 21st century. I have seen, as I'm sure Professor Sinn has, I have seen in the pipeline, MIT pipeline and other universities that are dealing with high-tech opportunities, tremendous technology substitution coming in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, that takes my breath away. So what I try to imagine, and when I talk to CEOs, I ask them, do you see in the 22nd century, or even mid-part of the 21st century, do you see mass wage labor in the equation by 2050 in a high-tech world? Or do you see more small, boutique, specialized workforces? With the exception of the culture industries and the health industries, almost to a person, the businesses I work with see smaller workforces. The economists still talking about upgrading skills. And the politicians, and I don't want to step on any toes here of economists here in the audience, but you know, we're still operating under the classical economics of Baptist Say, one of the early economists who basically outlined the notion of productivity. He basically said, productivity, new technology increases productivity. It may destroy jobs by creating new opportunities, but eventually the new productivity makes it cheaper to buy goods and services, and therefore it encourages demand and then increases the ability to create more jobs. That's been the traditional orthodox wisdom of classical and neoclassical economic theory for 200 years. What I'm suggesting is that the new technologies that have been introduced with the beginning of numerical control technology in the early 60s are ushering in an era where increased productivity by new technology means fewer mass wage labor jobs and more boutique specialized employment. So that we have to continue to increase productivity, but we have to rethink what human beings do. And I hope during the discussion tonight we can talk about a whole series of proposals on how to rethink work both in the marketplace and in non-conventional settings. But
Aber
I think that's right.
lassen Sie uns erst, Professor Sinn, noch mal bei der Analyse bleiben.
It is very convenient for economists, politicians, business leaders, trade unionists to say our jobs are going to another country, our jobs are going overseas, our jobs are being outsourced. Why can't we be protected? But when you look at the statistics, only a tiny fraction of the employment loss in Germany, as you know, Professor Sinn, is because of outsourcing to other countries. In my country, it's less than 5%. It's very small here as well. And let me give you by way of a comparison. A lot of German citizens, like Americans, say, oh, all the manufacturing is going to China. We've got to get back the jobs from China, correct? It is interesting that a lot of manufacturing is going to China. But what you don't know is the Chinese economy has eliminated 15% of all the factory workers in the last 7 years. Where did they go? They didn't go to the Tiger 10 countries. They didn't go to some other part of the world. They disappeared forever. Because the cheapest Chinese worker isn't as cheap as the automated, state-of-the-art, high-production technology values that they can get by technology substitution. Globally, including Europe, 14% of all the factory jobs in the whole world have completely disappeared in 7 years. That's a reality. And when I wrote the book, the first edition of the book in 95, my projections were too conservative. If you simply stay at this rate of progression and don't assume that technology is going to become any more effective, we end factory labor by 2035. At just this progression. We will still have workers in the factories, but there will be a small workforce working with very intelligent technologies. So if that's the case in China, and of course in China the big issue is, and that's why the government has dealt with this week, that we see the 200 million people that are doing quite well. They're in the shopping malls, they're being employed. We don't see the 900 million Chinese who are doing very poor, impoverished in the countryside, moving to the cities without jobs, tremendous social unrest. China may be an opportunity, but it's also a very dangerous place to live in terms of distribution of income. And now I'd like to address the question of wages. I agree with Professor Sinn that if you lower the wages, you can at least buy some time to get jobs against the rest of the labor force in the rest of the world. But we're dealing with a global labor force against diminishing job opportunities. Now, one country can take advantage of another country by trying to grasp what's left into its society by lowering the wages. Here's the problem. Many economists here say we need to go to the American market model. The social model is too expensive, the European dream is too expensive, the economy is anemic, the jobs are disappearing, we're in Eurosclerosis. The American model is the neoconservative, neoliberal model in the United States. It's a little brutal, it's a little Darwinian, it's everyone on their own, it's personal accountability, but Americans know how to create a growth economy and provide jobs. I'd like to give, respectfully, a different opinion. I wish it wasn't a different opinion, but I'm going to give it. The fact is that we have grown the American economy in the last 15 years under both neoconservative and neoliberal regimes, from Bush to Clinton, by beggaring the workforce and increasing the income distribution problems. In 1960, the United States was the most middle class of the OECD countries in the world, the most middle class. In the last 25 years of neoconservative and neoliberal economic theory, we have plummeted to 24th among the industrial OECD nations in income inequality, the gap between the very rich at the top and millions of working people at the bottom. The middle class, some went up to the upper middle, but many of it, as Professor Sinn said, the wages have been stagnant. They've been somewhat declining. We have more poverty than the European Union. You have bad poverty here, but we have more absolute poverty. When you saw the pictures of New Orleans and you saw the people there, you said, this can't be America, this looks like the third world. This didn't surprise us. If you spent time in America, it's 1 out of 5 young people are in that kind of poverty. So the result of 25 years of the unfettered market is this. We've increased the inequality. We have 2% of the adult male workforce in prison. We have 1 out of 5 young people in poverty. And then on top of it, the way we kept everything moving was not because we have superior entrepreneurial skills to the German businesses. I work with businesses on both sides. You've got great entrepreneurs and CEOs. They are world class. And remember, for all the carping about Germany, what I remind my American friends are always saying, oh, poor old Germany, on the rocks, falling apart, terrible, follow the American model. What I remind my American friends is that little Germany, with 82 million people, is the #1 exporting power of 205 countries in the world. Not so bad for 82 million people. You export more than the U.S. or 300 million people, China with 1.2 billion, and India. The fact is, you also lead in the engineering industry, in construction. You lead in food wholesale retail. You're world-class in auto. You lead in insurance across the board. Now, I don't say that to flatter you. But what I'm really getting to is the reason the American economy grew in the last 15 years isn't because we had superior entrepreneurial skills or simply an unfettered market. We built American growth on debt. On debt. We came out of the 1989 to 92 recession by issuing credit cards across the country. We went on a credit binge for 15 years. We moved the economy by buying on credit so people could come back to work in temp jobs.
Professor Rifkin, Sie haben jetzt sehr viele Argumente geliefert. Vielleicht lassen Sie doch noch mal Professor Sinn.
May I just finish the one sentence?
Okay.
But what happened was we depleted our family savings rate from 9% to negative. So we now are actually spending more than we make. We have record government debt, record trade deficits, and record bankruptcies. So if this is the model of a good economy, one that has greater income distribution problems, more poverty and incarceration, and record consumer and government debt, if that's the best model in the world to follow, then we're in trouble. There must be another alternative. If you were to ask what would a Chinese person say if they were here in the audience or here on the stage, it would depend on which Chinese person. A wealthy entrepreneur in Shanghai or a very poor, impoverished peasant in the outlying regions. The fact is, the official policy in China is that they're doing great. And yeah, there's a lot of growth there. What you have to do is imagine a computer screen. We're talking about small windows inside a larger window. I think the larger window here is we're seeing a great structural change in the nature of work. Within the large window on a computer, there are smaller windows. And the smaller windows are about how does each country within that large window try to capture some short-term advantage in a global capital and a global labor pool. But these little windows are fairly inconsequential to developing long-term policy for Germany. Germany is the third leading industrial power in the world, and more interestingly, Germany is one of the few places where there is an idea factory happening. You know, I was just in Brussels a week ago, and we had a meeting with the European Parliament. And I said, look, with all the complaints about Europe and all of the misgivings and all of the struggles and all of the negativity, what's interesting to note is that in Germany and Europe is the only place where new ideas are being addressed on how to bring the world into a 21st century. Does anyone here think China is bringing new ideas on how to globalize the world? It's 19th and 20th century market directed. Does anyone believe that the new ideas are coming out of Africa or South America? So for all the problems here in Germany and Europe, at least you can step back for a minute and congratulate yourself with all the problems, and I'm not naive about Germany and Europe, that at least you're having a conversation about how to create new ways to deal with work. Now, there are models here in Europe. Certainly Denmark's flex labor model is a good model, because the idea is to make sure that you're constantly repositioning for work and not out of work and that's it. So there's things that can be borrowed from the Denmark model where you're unemployed for a certain amount of time, you get your full benefits, they're portable back to employment. Certainly the Scandinavian countries have demonstrated to all of us that it's possible to streamline the social net and the social model, make it relevant to the 21st century, eliminate the paternalism and dependency, but still grow your economy. And so I think the question is not do you want a social model and a market model. You want both working together. The strength of a social model is no one gets left behind, solidarity. And you've shown in Germany to the world in 50 years that you can create a humane way for people to live with each other. The weakness in the social model is the old paternalism. It's so deep in the history of Europe can sink back in where someone says, I'll let this government take care of me or the company take care of me, etc. In America, the strength of our unfettered market model is everyone's on their own, it's material self-interest, and you have plenty of opportunity to swim or sink. It's a little economic engine for self-interest. The weakness of our model is because there's not enough social controls in place by political parties and trade unions and civil society, it can end up winner take all. The invisible hand is purely a fiction. It's the best term Adam Smith ever came up with. Because if you let the market simply go by itself, and you need to let it go, but without any controls, you end up with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. So here's my thought for Germany. It would be disastrous for Germany to have a debate on, do we want the social model versus the market model? It polarizes the country. Rather, Germany should say, how can we take the best of both models and use this to shore up the weaknesses of the other? Meaning, reward entrepreneurialism, reward individual initiative, reward the marketplace. But at the same time that you get that economic engine moving, make sure you have an updated, state-of-the-art, 21st century social model so that you can make sure the fruits are distributed so no one falls behind. That way, it seems to me, this grand coalition could create a grand new idea in people's minds, that each person lives with both models in their head. One is always there to monitor and check the other. Therefore, you have the best of the market and the best of the social model. But if you end up just with a social model, you could end up with dependency on the state and loss of initiative. If you end up with just the market model, you could end up with winner take all in a very brutal society, and I don't think we want any of those alternatives. Well, of course, it's industrial history. You know, we started off the Industrial Revolution with a 70-hour work week in draconian conditions. If you want to measure the history of progress of the Industrial Revolution, it has to do with the following. As new technologies increased productivity, we had a choice. Reduce the workforce or reduce the work week. The unions organized all over the world. They said, we prefer to reduce the work week. If we still had a 70-hour work week, how many people would be employed? So as we increased our technological capacities, increased our productivity so we could produce more with less labor, we pushed. The management didn't, the workers did. The political parties did. The trade unions pushed, and they demanded a 10-hour day, a 6-day work week, a 5-day work week, an 8-hour day. So the whole history of judging the Industrial Revolution is increasing technology capacity, increasing productivity, shorter work weeks, more pay, and more benefits. If we assume that the new high technologies of the 21st century, the software, the telecom, the biotech, the nanotechnologies, if we assume that these technologies are at least as productive as steam power and rail in the 19th century and the internal combustion engine electricity in the 20th century, then why would we reverse industrial history by going to longer hours? We should be reducing, again, in half. We went from 70 to 40 in one century. Why don't we go from 40 to 20 in the next century? What's absurd is having some people work long hours while other people are underemployed and unemployed. Now, to the French model. When the book was published in France, we worked both sides of the aisle because that was the suggestion in the book. I borrowed it from an Arthur Anderson consultant. It wasn't original to me. And my friend Michel Rocard wrote a foreword of the book, and then I worked with Philip Séguin from the center-right party. The idea was to introduce a 35-hour work week voluntarily, not by mandate. And if the companies introduce 35 and you get paid for 39, it's voluntary, that the government then relieve the company of payroll and other taxes to the extent that they've gone to 35 and still paid for 39. It's a wash. They lose no money. They get a little incentive in the bargain. Now, the government loses revenue when you do that. How does it pick up the revenue? The idea was that a shorter work week, you can have more people working if they're properly trained. They're paying taxes. They're buying in the economy. They're moving the economy. Where it ran short, if I may say, in France, I preferred voluntary rather than mandatory. And I think there should have been more flexibility built in for management and labor on determining hours. Had you built in the incentives for management and labor to be much more flexible on the hours, then I think we would have had a model to work. But for anyone to tell me that in the 21st century, we're going to tell our children, you have to work longer hours at less pay while the technology and productivity is increasing dramatically, that's insane. There's something wrong with an economic model that does that. It doesn't make any sense. Let me say, there's two ways to go about this in the short run. This is the small window, not the big window. How does Germany stay globally competitive when other workforces are working long hours with less pay? That's the short run. You can beggar your workforce so that you can be competitive with the cheapest workforces in the world. That's an alternative. I don't think you're going to like that alternative.
Why the cheapest?
or cheap enough to be...
Take the Austrians. They work for 21 euros per hour.
Right.
Why not
Granted that. Let me grant that. You could reduce the wages and not be the lowest in the world. But there's another way to do it. Think smart and add value, as we say. Think smart and add value. I'll give you a classic example. You're going to have a great discussion here in Germany about health care this year. Very, very big, robust debate going on in Germany, the United States, all over the world. German industry has said one of the reasons the German workforce is uncompetitive is the high cost of health care. It's taken over payroll taxes. So the workers are committing, 7.5% of their payroll taxes to health care. The employer pays out 6.6%. German industry, the Industrial Association said, this makes us uncompetitive. It's too high. So what do? One alternative is to eliminate the health care. Another alternative is to think smart and add value. The fact is that German workers suffer from a range of diseases. We call them diseases of affluence. We have it in America. We have heart attacks, strokes, cancer, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, mental illness, and ADHD. These are diseases that we see in affluent countries. These diseases are rampant. Germany, like America, you're catching up to us in obesity. We're still number one, way ahead of you. But you're catching up to us in obesity. You've dropped your cigarette smoking, but it's still higher than ours. What's the result of all of this lifestyle problems with health? The fact is, we know that German industry loses 42 billion euros a year in lost productivity because workers have health problems. And not only lost productivity from absenteeism, but also from presenteeism, when they're on the job but not working up to par because they have ill health, mental or physical. This is the German economy, 42 billion euros a year. We also know that 60 to 70% of the diseases that plague German workers, like American workers, can be remediated by environmental and lifestyle changes. Now, what do? How do you change the system? In order to add value and work smart, what Germany could have is a great debate on moving from a system where you pay for treating illness to a system where you pay to keep people well. Now, how academic is this? Major companies like Dow Chemical Company, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, what they have done, these companies, they said, we're not waiting for changes because the healthcare cost is killing us. They're instituting prevention and enhancement programs on site in their companies. Prevention is where you do the diagnostic testing, the annual checkup. Enhancement is where you change lifestyle. Some of these global companies have introduced gym facilities on site to get the workers healthy. It's all voluntary. Or gym privileges off-site. They've introduced nutritional programs to help the workers and their families rethink dietary choices. They've introduced stress reduction programs. They've introduced a whole series of health enhancement programs. Why have they done this? Why would companies do this? What they're finding now is that for every dollar that they invest in these health enhancement programs, the companies are picking up $6 to $8 in savings. Better productivity, less absenteeism, lower health costs. So here's my suggestion for Germany as an alternative suggestion. You're having a great debate. You had some legislation 2 years ago, I think that was introduced in the Bundestag, about a prevention health act for Germany. What was missing from the act was motivation. You can't force a worker to become healthy. You can't mandate it. It's a lifestyle change. What I would suggest is a non-discriminatory voluntary system where the German government says, we will subsidize and underwrite a new industry for wellness, a lot of jobs for people who are going to help provide wellness to companies. Stress reduction, exercise, diet, nutrition, that's a lot of jobs. Secondly, the government can say to companies, if you voluntarily engage in a health enhancement program for your workers, for every dollar you invest in that program, it's voluntary, we give you $1 of tax relief up to a cap, the government. Third, for all the people that voluntarily choose to go through the program and are certified, and if you see the health care costs are going down for the employees, then the government should say that there's a reduction in the payroll taxes for the employees, that's motivation, and a reduction in the percentage of contribution by the employers. So what I'm suggesting here is that this isn't a magic bullet, but it's a way of thinking smart about how to make the German workforce not more beggared, but to enhance its value by moving from sickness to wellness and promoting it as a way to have a good quality of life for the society. There are so many ideas like this across all of German industry that you could do.
I think you made your point. Nun ist es so, als Politiker bin ich gewählt auf Zeit. Ich kann mir viele Gedanken über das große Fenster machen, aber ich muss einfach auch sehen, wenn ich wiedergewählt werden will, im Falle Deutschlands, wie bringe ich den Arbeitsmarkt wirklich kurzfristig in Bewegung? Was können Sie wirklich der Politik empfehlen, um auch kurzfristig Effekte zu erzielen, diese hohe Arbeitslosigkeit in Deutschland runterzubringen?
Well, there's two approaches. You can fight for a diminishing pie or bake a new pie. All right? The great economic revolutions in history, the really great economic revolutions in history, the really big ones, they occur when two things happen. A basic change in the way society organizes the energy of the planet, and a basic change in the way society communicates with each other to organize the new energy. Historically, the convergence of new energy regimes and new communication regimes are the pivotal point in economic history. They change the equation forever. Example, ancient Samaria, Iraq, the first to go to hydraulic agriculture. Surplus grain became the energy. It was complicated. They had to create cuneiform or writing to manage an energy regime based on stored grain. Writing in agriculture, 10,000-year multiplier effect. Early industrial age, Germans were there first. The print press. Chinese already had it, but you had better print press, movable type. The print press became the command and control mechanism for steam power and coal, the first industrial revolution. When we went to steam and coal, we increased the pace, speed, connectivity, and density of exchange. We had to have a more agile communication system to organize the industrial revolution, print. We couldn't have organized the industrial revolution with codex, too slow. The telegraph and telephone became the command and control mechanism to organize the second industrial revolution, the internal combustion engine and oil. Again, the Germans brought us the internal combustion engine. Now, the reason I say this, new pie. We're ending an energy era. It's clear. It may be 2 decades, it may be 3 decades, it may be 4 decades. We're not in the sunrise, we're in the sunset of the fossil fuel era. We have big historic problems, global warming, third world debt, the Middle East, and global oil production, all connected to the oil era. Having said that, there was a great communication revolution here in Germany and America in the 1990s. Personal computers, the internet, satellite, wireless communication. Siemens and these companies are right at the forefront of this revolution. We distributed communication. We connected the central nervous system of 20% of the human race. Step back. That's not, the mission of this communication revolution is deeper than productivity at the workplace. I believe that this communication revolution of decentralized communication is the command and control for a new energy regime. We need to exit fossil fuels. We need to shift to renewables and a hydrogen economy. If we can,
that's again the very big.
But let me explain the convergence. I think this is now. I think you can begin to leverage public and private partnerships with German government, German industry, for Germany to lead a third industrial revolution. The convergence is this. And this is, I think, important. When you get a fuel cell with hydrogen, it's like a computer. With a computer, you generate your own information, then you share it on the internet. With fuel cells, you have to imagine in Germany in 30 years from now, millions of fuel cells, little cartridges, portables. They'll be out in Japan in 1 year. 8 companies, portables, 1 year from now. You have to imagine stationary fuel cells. It's already here. Linde AG has just put one up in the Munich airport 2 years ago as a backup generation. You have to imagine every vehicle being a power plant on wheels. What is the relationship? When you generate power with your fuel cell, you're your own power and utility. Whether you're a business or a homeowner or a factory owner, what do you do with a surplus you don't need? This is where the communication revolution comes in. We're going to need to reconfigure the power grid of Germany and Europe and America and the world using the same software, the same hardware that Siemens and HP and the others created for Silicon Valley communications, so that when I have surplus power that I generate as an end user, I can send it back, if the price is right on the grid, peer-to-peer, decentralized. The coming together of distributed communication and hydrogen is a third industrial revolution. Who should lead? I believe it's going to be between Germany and Japan. I truly believe Japan is a little ahead. It's going to be between the two. Germany is positioned. You're the economic powerhouse of Europe. You lead in key industries that are essential: chemical, engineering, construction, world-class in auto. You have deep pockets with the insurance and banking community. And you also have the mission in Germany to go to the next stage of integration of Europe. Germany has to lead. How do you complete Lisbon? The Services Directive is fine. But the real completion of Lisbon agenda for Europe is integration of the infrastructure of Europe so you can have a seamless market. You need a seamless transportation grid, communication grid, power grid, underwritten with sustainable, renewable hydrogen infrastructure. If you in Germany can lead Europe to a seamless infrastructure across your 25 member states in 30 years with a new energy regime, so that you can engage in commerce with the same ease we do in the continental United States across our member states, you can move Europe to become the first transnational space that moves us out of carbon, moves us to sustainable development, and you create a new pie. There are millions of jobs when you change your energy and communication regimes. That's short run, not long run. But when I say short run, I'm talking about the next 30 years, not the next 4. Long run, we have to rethink work. We have to put more employment in civil society and the not-for-profit sector. But in the short run, it seems to me this grand coalition has an opportunity to bring together the business community of Germany, the trade unions, the civil society, and say, what's our mission? We have a grand coalition. What's our grand mission? If there's no mission, the coalition's not going to hold. Perhaps it's possible now, given the historic moment, for Germany to lead a third industrial revolution, tell the public this is not a killer app, there's no magic bullet, don't measure the current government in 2 years simply by the fact that we didn't produce a new energy regime. But tell the public, straightforward, we're going to take a 25-year gamble so that our children can have a better world that's sustainable, with short-term job opportunities, while we wrestle with the long-term question of reshifting the nature of employment. I think that's an opportunity. It's a new pie, not fighting over the morsels of an old pie.